Daniel Miller slumped in the uncomfortable metal chair, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. This was his third interview at the Queenstown police station in the past 24 hours. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the sterile interview room. Across from him sat Detective Inspector Grant Wilson, a man whose calm demeanor barely masked a weary resolve, leading the investigation. He was flanked by two younger officers from the regional South Island Police Force. "Mr. Miller," Detective Wilson said, his voice low and steady. "I realize we've gone over this multiple times, but we need to revisit the timeline once more. Every detail, no matter how small it seems, might prove vital, especially now that the South Island Police Force has joined the investigation." Daniel nodded, rubbing his face with his palms. The raw exhaustion was a physical weight. "I understand. Whatever helps find Celeste. Please ask me anything." He took a deep, shaky breath. "Walk us through yesterday again. What time did you last see your wife?" "It was around 6:30 a.m., Daniel began, the memory both precious and painful. "We were staying at Lake Haven Retreat, that luxury resort by Lake Wakatapu. Celeste had planned to attend the sunrise yoga session at 6:45 by the lake. She kissed me goodbye while I was still half asleep." He paused, the ghost of her soft lips on his forehead, now a sharp pain twisting in his chest. How could a moment so simple now feel like a lifetime ago? "And what were your plans for that day?" prompted Officer Janine Kelly, one of the regional officers, her voice gentle. "We had booked flight boarding on Lake Wakatapu for 10 a.m., followed by cliff jumping in the afternoon," Daniel replied, his voice thick with emotion. Celeste was really excited about both. She loves adventure sports. His voice cracked on the present tense, a stark reminder of her sudden absence. After yoga, she was supposed to have a massage and facial at the hotel spa at 8 a.m. She was meant to be back in our room by 9:30 for breakfast. It was all planned out. "And when did you realize something was wrong?" Detective Wilson asked, making notes in a small black notebook, his pen scratching softly in the quiet room. "Around 10 a.m., when she hadn't returned," Daniel said. "I waited another hour, thinking maybe the spa treatments were running late. I tried calling her around 11 o'clock, but then I realized her phone was still in our room." Daniel gestured helplessly, his hands trembling slightly. "That's when I really started to worry. Celeste never goes anywhere without her phone. Never." He had a sinking feeling, a knot tightening in his stomach. "I went down to the front desk, asked about her. The staff checked with the spa, but they said she never showed up for her appointment." "What did you do next?" Officer Kelly asked. "I asked them to help me search the resort," Daniel said, his voice growing more agitated with the memory of the frantic search. "Staff checked everywhere. Restaurants, gardens, the beach, the gym. We scoured every corner of the place. By 1 p.m., we couldn't find her anywhere, so I came here to report her missing. What else could I do?" Detective Wilson nodded, flipping through his notes. "Mr. Miller, we've made some progress in the investigation today. We've questioned all hotel staff and several guests. We've also reviewed the CCTV footage from the resort." Daniel sat up straighter, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. "And we can confirm your wife attended the yoga session at 6:45 a.m., Detective Wilson stated. "Multiple witnesses saw her there. Cameras then captured her walking toward the spa between 7:50 and 8:15 a.m. So she was heading for her appointment," Daniel said, relief washing over him momentarily. "But the spa said she never arrived?" Officer Kelly interjected, the small flicker of hope extinguished just as quickly as it had appeared. "The footage shows something else. Your wife was approached by a man in a staff uniform before she reached the spa. They appeared to have a conversation, and then they walked away together." Daniel's heart raced, a cold dread creeping in. "What? Who was he?" "One of the hotel staff." Detective Wilson shook his head slowly. "That's where things get concerning. We've checked with management. This individual doesn't appear on any staff roster. No one recognizes him. Then he must have kidnapped her." Daniel slammed his palm on the table, the sudden noise echoing in the room. "Have you found where he took her? Did anyone see anything?" "We've checked all available footage," the third officer explained, his tone flat. "The man and your wife exited the hotel and walked onto the street. There were no signs of struggle or distress. No one, staff or guests, reported hearing anyone asking for help or seeing anything unusual. So you're saying my wife just voluntarily walked off with a stranger? Daniel couldn't keep the disbelief and hurt from his voice. It felt impossible, a betrayal he couldn't comprehend. Detective Wilson cleared his throat softly. We're not drawing conclusions yet, Mr. Miller, but there's something else you should know. We spoke with the yoga instructor, Mr. Patel. He mentioned that your wife made an unusual comment during the session. What comment? Daniel leaned forward, desperate for any scrap of information. He says she mentioned she'd be free of everything soon, Detective Wilson replied. Mr. Patel didn't think much of it at the time. He assumed she was talking about feeling free after yoga, but given the circumstances, Daniel shook his head vehemently, his voice rising. No, that's absurd. Celeste wouldn't just leave. We just got married 2 weeks ago. This is our honeymoon, for God's sake. His voice echoed off the bare walls of the interview room, raw with anguish. Mr. Miller, please, Detective Wilson said calmly, his gaze steady. We're not suggesting anything. We're simply gathering all possible information to understand the situation completely. Daniel fought to regain his composure, running a hand through his disheveled hair. So what about this man? Where did they go? Did the cameras follow them? They didn't go to the parking lot, Officer Kelly explained. They walked onto Shotover Street. We've been checking street cameras and asking local businesses for footage. We managed to track them for about 2 blocks before losing them. And you still haven't found her? Daniel's voice was strained, barely a whisper. Detective Wilson shook his head, a look of genuine concern on his face. Queenstown is relatively quiet this time of year, but we've been asking locals, shop owners, restaurant staff. No one recalls seeing them together. We've expanded our search radius today, but haven't had any significant leads yet. So what now? Daniel asked, desperation evident in his voice, a feeling of helplessness threatening to engulf him. We've called in additional resources from the regional police, Detective Wilson explained. Tomorrow, we'll widen our search perimeter around Queenstown. We've also alerted Border Control and Sea Patrol for the entire South Island, as well as immigration authorities and North Island crossings. If someone is trying to take her off the island, we'll know. Daniel nodded slowly, trying to process everything he was being told. 5 days into their dream honeymoon, and his wife had vanished without a trace. Nothing made sense anymore. The joy of their wedding, the excitement of their trip, it all felt like a cruel joke. Is there anything else you can tell us, Mr. Miller? Detective Wilson asked, his voice gentle. Anything unusual about your wife's behavior recently? Any concerns she expressed, even small ones? Daniel shook his head, his mind a jumble of confusion and fear. No, nothing. She was happy. We were happy. This is supposed to be the happiest time of our lives. He wiped a hand across his face, exhaustion finally setting in, heavy and profound. Detective Wilson closed his notebook. We'll continue our investigation first thing tomorrow morning. Try to get some rest, Mr. Miller. We'll drive you back to the hotel now. As they led him out to the police car, Daniel cast his gaze across the starlit waters of Lake Wakatapu, a vast, dark expanse. Where in this beautiful, vast wilderness could his wife be? The thought that she might be in danger, scared and alone, was unbearable, a torment he couldn't escape. Please, he whispered to the officers as they reached the car, the plea torn from his soul. Just please, find her. Back in the opulent honeymoon suite at Lake Haven Retreat, Daniel shut the door and slumped against it, the day's burdens pressing heavily on him. The room, once a haven with its sweeping views of the mountains and lake and a luxurious king-sized bed, now felt more like a mausoleum to the happiness that had been cruelly taken from him. Every object was a painful reminder of Celeste's absence. Celeste's open suitcase lay on the luggage rack, her clothes meticulously folded inside, a silent testament to her planned return. Her nightgown was still draped over the armchair where she'd left it yesterday morning, as if she would return any minute to slip it on. Her slippers were beside the bed, precisely where she'd stepped out of them before heading to yoga, waiting for her feet to fill them again. Daniel moved to the bed and sank down onto it, his body heavy with exhaustion that went deeper than mere physical tiredness. He knew he should try to sleep. Tomorrow would bring another round of questioning, another day of searching, of agonizing uncertainty. But his mind raced, replaying every moment of the past weeks, searching for some clue, some sign he might have missed, a hidden meaning in her words or actions. He changed into pajama bottoms and a t-shirt, the silk feeling foreign and cold against his skin, then lay back on the king-size bed. The empty space beside him was a void screaming with silence, a chasm that had opened up in his life. They'd only been married for 2 weeks. How could this be happening? How could their perfect beginning have dissolved into this nightmare? Rubbing his eyes, Daniel tried to quiet his racing thoughts, the relentless questions swirling in his head. Something felt wrong about all of this, deeply and fundamentally wrong. Not just the disappearance itself, which was surreal enough, but something in the details nagged at him, a discordant note in the story he was being told. The mysterious staff member who wasn't on the hotel roster, the strange comment about being free. None of it aligned with the Celeste he knew, the vibrant, loving woman who had just pledged her life to him. Rolling to his side, he spotted Celeste's phone on the nightstand, precisely where the police had returned it to him after their examination. He'd argued vehemently that he should keep it, just in case Celeste tried to reach out or someone called with information about her whereabouts. After some negotiation and a thorough forensic check, they'd agreed, but only for the first 72 hours, after which it would need to be reassessed. Daniel reached for the device, the cool metal feeling heavy in his hand. The screen lit up to reveal a flurry of notifications. Missed calls from friends and family wishing them well, text messages asking about their honeymoon, social media alerts. But there was nothing related to her disappearance, no message from her, no sign that she was trying to contact him. He hadn't told anyone yet, not his parents, not her family back in the States. It had only been a day, a single agonizing day, and part of him still clung desperately to the hope that there was a simple explanation, a misunderstanding, that she would walk through the door any minute with an apologetic smile. As he set the phone back down, his own phone pinged with a new email notification. Picking it up, he saw the sender was Claire Madison, their wedding organizer. The subject line read, "Your wedding photos are ready. The edited photos from your special day are ready." The email began cheerfully. Find them in the attached Google Drive folder. It was an absolute honor to be part of such a beautiful celebration of love. Daniel hesitated for a moment before tapping the link. Claire had mentioned the photos would be ready 7 to 10 days after the wedding, a timeline that now felt like an eternity ago. Part of him wasn't sure he could bear to look at them now. With Celeste missing, the joyous memories a stark contrast to his current despair. But another part, a deep, aching need, wanted to see her face, to remember the overwhelming joy they'd shared just 2 weeks prior. The folder loaded, revealing about 50 professionally edited photos, each image a perfect capture of what had undoubtedly been the happiest day of his life. There were shots of the ceremony at the countryside estate in the Cotswolds, the golden sunlight filtering through ancient oak trees, casting a warm glow on the proceedings. There was Celeste's family and friends, who had flown all the way from the U.S., mingling with his British relatives, a beautiful blend of cultures and lives. "Where are you, honey?" he murmured to himself, his voice thick with unshed tears, as he flipped through image after image. There was Celeste in her gown, a vision that had truly taken his breath away, looking like an angel bathed in light. There they were exchanging vows, her eyes glistening with tears of joy, their hands clasped tightly together. Their first kiss as husband and wife, a tender, hopeful moment. The cutting of the cake, their hands intertwined around the knife. Their first dance, lost in each other's arms. He continued swiping until he came to one of his favorites, a shot of them walking back down the aisle after being pronounced husband and wife. The photo captured them perfectly, radiant with happiness, holding hands as their guests stood on either side of the aisle, applauding and cheering. Colorful bunting hung overhead against the brilliant blue sky, and the lush greenery of the Cotswolds estate provided a perfect, idyllic backdrop. Daniel zoomed in on their faces, smiling faintly at the vivid memory of that joyous walk, the cheers of their loved ones ringing in his ears. Then, almost absently, he began panning around the image, taking in the guests' joyful expressions, the blur of happy faces. That's when something caught his eye in the background, something that didn't fit, a dark anomaly in a scene of pure light. He zoomed in further, his fingers trembling slightly, on a figure standing toward the rear of the gathering, partially obscured by a large oak tree. The blood drained from his face, leaving him feeling cold and numb. While everyone else in the photo was clapping and smiling, their attention focused solely on the newlyweds. This man stood rigid, arms at his sides, his face serious, almost cold, as he stared directly at Celeste, his gaze intense and unsettling. "Alexander Vale," Daniel whispered, his voice hollow in the empty room. It was unmistakably Celeste's ex-husband, the man they had deliberately not invited, the man who had absolutely no business being at their wedding, watching them from the shadows. This was the man who had spent months harassing and threatening Celeste after she left him, making her life a misery, until they'd finally reached a fragile, uneasy arrangement. Celeste wouldn't reveal what she knew about his corrupt business dealings if he left them alone. And he had, or so they desperately hoped. Daniel sat bolt upright on the bed, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Alexander Vale had been at their wedding, a dark, lurking presence, watching from the shadows. And now, just 2 weeks later, Celeste was missing. It couldn't be a coincidence. It was too intertwined, too sinister. Daniel jumped off the bed, his exhaustion instantly replaced by a surge of adrenaline, a fierce protective instinct taking over. He quickly downloaded the wedding photo to his phone, his fingers flying across the screen, determined to show it to the police first thing in the morning. No, scratch that. He wouldn't wait. He would call Detective Wilson right now. His fingers shook as he scrolled through his contact for the detective's number. Just as he was about to tap call, his phone lit up with an incoming call from an unknown number. Daniel stared at it for a second, his mind racing, a sense of foreboding washing over him. Who would be calling at this hour from an unsaved number? He answered, his voice tight with apprehension. "Hello, Daniel." The voice on the other end made his heart stop. It was Celeste. "Celeste, where are you? Are you okay?" "I've been out of my mind with worry," he stammered, relief and confusion warring within him. "I'm fine, Daniel." Her voice sounded flat, distant, not at all like the warm, vibrant woman he'd married just days ago. It was like talking to a stranger. "I'm so sorry for doing it this way." "Doing what, Celeste? What's happening? Are you in danger? Just tell me where you are, and I'll come get you right now." He was ready to drop everything, to go anywhere to bring her back. There was a long pause before she continued, and when she spoke again, her words were like a physical blow. "On our honeymoon, I've had time to think about everything. About us. And I don't think this is going to work out." Daniel felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach, the air knocked out of him. "What are you talking about? Not work out? Celeste, we're married. We have different interests. Different lives," she continued, her voice devoid of emotion. "Getting married it was a mistake. A big one. I need some time alone to figure things out. That's why I left." "You left?" Daniel's mind reeled. This couldn't be real. "Yes, but now I realize everyone is searching for me, and I don't want that kind of attention. I'm not in danger, Daniel. I just need space. I need to be on my own." Daniel sank back onto the bed, struggling to process what he was hearing. It felt like a bad dream. "Is this about your job? About moving to England with me? Because we can work that out, Celeste. We can find a solution. We can make it work." "Yes, that's part of it," she interjected, her voice slightly sharper. "But there's more. I just don't feel like we're suitable for each other in the long run. We promised to be with each other until death, and I don't think that's possible for us, Daniel. Not really. Celeste, this isn't you," Daniel said, his voice filled with desperation. "This isn't making any sense. Is someone forcing you to say this?" Blink twice if. He stopped himself, realizing the utter absurdity of asking someone to blink over a phone call. "Just tell me where you are. Please. I have to go now," she said, her voice suddenly hurried. a flicker of something he couldn't quite place in her tone. "I'm sorry, Daniel. Please, just move on from me. Celeste, wait." But the line went dead, the silence on the other end a chilling finality. "Damn it." Daniel hurled his phone onto the bed, a guttural sound of frustration and anguish tearing from his throat. He paced the room, running his hands through his hair, trying desperately to make sense of what had just happened. That hadn't sounded like Celeste. Not really. Her words, perhaps, the vocabulary was hers, but not her voice, not her spirit, not the vibrant, loving woman he knew. The Celeste he knew would never, ever just walk away from their marriage after 2 weeks without even a face-to-face conversation, without explaining, without fighting for what they had. They'd been together for 3 years before the wedding, building a life, facing challenges together. They'd weathered storms, including the relentless harassment from Alexander Vale. This felt fundamentally wrong. And then a detail hit him, a small, crucial piece of information that made him stop in his tracks, his mind suddenly clearing with a chilling realization. Celeste's phone was still here, on the nightstand, right where the police had placed it. If she had left voluntarily, packed her bags, and decided their marriage was a mistake for all the reasons she'd just spouted on the phone, why would she leave her phone behind? It made no sense. Celeste was incredibly close to her family. Despite any financial challenges they faced, she spoke to them every day. She would never just cut them off without a word. It was unthinkable. And what about the man in the staff uniform who had approached her at the hotel? If Celeste had planned to leave on her own, why the elaborate charade with a fake staff member? Why the stage departure? It was too convoluted, too theatrical for a simple decision to leave. Then there was Alexander Vale, uninvited at their wedding, watching Celeste like a hawk from the shadows. None of it added up to a wife simply deciding she wanted space. It pointed to something far more sinister, a forced disappearance disguised as a voluntary departure. Daniel grabbed his phone again, his hand steady now with a newfound purpose. He quickly changed out of his pajamas and into jeans and a sweater. He needed to get back to the police station immediately. He had to show them the wedding photo, had to tell them about the call, about the inconsistencies about Alexander Vale. As he left his room and waited for the elevator, his phone rang again. This time, it was Detective Wilson. "Mr. Miller, I need to inform you that your wife has just contacted us." "I know," Daniel said quickly, his voice urgent. "She called me too. But Detective, something's not right. That wasn't really her. I mean, it was her voice, but not her words, not her intent. And I found something else, something crucial. Alexander Vale, her ex-husband, was at our wedding, uninvited. I have a photo I can show you." "Mr. Miller," the detective interrupted, his tone professional but gentle, the kind of tone that conveyed a message he didn't want to deliver. "We traced the call immediately and dispatched an officer to check on your wife. She's staying at a service apartment by herself. The officer spoke with her personally. She confirmed she left of her own volition and is not in any danger." Daniel felt as if the floor beneath him had disappeared, as if he were falling into a bottomless pit. "What? No, that can't be right. Where's she? I need to see her. There's no way she just left." "I'm afraid I can't disclose that information," Detective Wilson said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Your wife has specifically requested privacy. And since there's no crime involved, according to her statement and the officer's assessment, we have to respect her wishes. You can't just close the investigation like that." Daniel's voice rose, drawing a curious glance from an elderly couple waiting patiently for the elevator. This was insane. "Mr. Miller, there's nothing more we can do from a police standpoint if your wife has chosen to leave," the detective explained patiently. "This is now a personal matter between you and her." His voice softened slightly, adopting a more empathetic tone. "If I may offer some personal advice, newlywed couples often get caught up in the excitement of the wedding without fully considering how their lives will change afterward. Perhaps give her some time to process things. Give her the space she says she needs." Daniel couldn't believe what he was hearing. It was a nightmare unfolding in broad daylight. "This is insane. My wife wouldn't just leave like this. Something else is going on. You have to believe me." "I understand this is difficult, Mr. Miller," Detective Wilson said, his voice regaining its professional distance. "But the case is closed. Good night, Mr. Miller." The line went dead, leaving Daniel standing in the hallway, phone clutched in his hand, completely alone in his desperate certainty that something was terribly, terribly wrong. Daniel returned to the suite, the luxurious room now feeling like a prison, slamming the door behind him with enough force to rattle the framed artwork on the walls. His mind raced, a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and a desperate need to understand the bewildering turn of events. The police had closed the case just like that. Celeste had supposedly told them, and him, that she'd left voluntarily, that their marriage was a mistake, a fleeting regret. But every fiber of Daniel's being rejected this explanation. It didn't align with the woman he'd fallen in love with, the woman who had stood before their families and friends just 2 weeks ago and promised to share her life with him, her eyes shining with genuine love and happiness. He paced the room, a caged animal, running his hands through his hair in frustration. If the police wouldn't help him, if they wouldn't even consider the possibility that something more sinister was at play, then he would have to figure this out himself. He wouldn't just stand by and do nothing. Daniel's thoughts kept returning to Alexander Vale. The man's presence at their wedding couldn't be a coincidence, not when Celeste disappeared just 2 weeks later. He remembered vividly the first few months after he and Celeste had become a couple. Alexander had been relentless, a constant, menacing presence, threatening phone calls at all hours, showing up unexpectedly at her workplace, even following her home one night, his car a dark shadow in her rearview mirror. The man had been utterly obsessed, unable to accept that Celeste had left him, that she had moved on and found happiness with someone else. But they'd found leverage, a way to make him back off, however temporarily. Through her work at Vale's investment firm, Celeste had discovered evidence of his corrupt business dealings, his money laundering operations. They'd struck a deal. Alexander would leave them alone, and they would keep quiet about what they knew, about the damning evidence she possessed. It had worked, or at least it had seemed to. Alexander had backed off, disappearing from their lives, and they had kept their end of the bargain. For 3 years, they hadn't heard a word from him. They'd built their life together, planned their wedding, looked forward to their future, believing they were finally free of his toxic influence. Daniel sat down at the elegant desk in the suite and pulled out his tablet, his fingers moving with a newfound focus. If Alexander Vale was behind Celeste's disappearance, if he had somehow orchestrated this elaborate charade, there might be clues to his whereabouts, a breadcrumb trail that could lead Daniel to his wife. He began searching online for any recent news about Alexander Vale, anything that might shed light on his current situation or location. What he found confirmed his deepest suspicions. Despite their silence about his illegal activities, someone else had eventually blown the whistle last year. A former business partner who had turned state's evidence in exchange for immunity. Alexander had faced significant fallout from the resulting investigation and charges. He'd lost several properties, a substantial portion of his company, and his carefully cultivated reputation had been publicly tarnished, though he had largely avoided major media attention internationally. Remarkably, though, he'd managed to avoid jail time, likely through expensive lawyers and carefully hidden evidence, a testament to his ability to manipulate the system. Daniel dug deeper, his focus narrowing. If Alexander still had property in New Zealand, that could potentially be where he was keeping Celeste, a hidden location far from prying eyes. He searched property records, corporate filings, anything that might reveal a connection between Alexander Vale and a New Zealand address. After an hour of intensive searching, cross-referencing names and companies, Daniel found what he was looking for. A listing for a property in Queenstown, purchased through a shell company that he was able to trace back to one of Alexander's remaining holdings, a complex web of ownership designed to obscure the true owner. The address was in a secluded area, nestled in the hills about 20 minutes from the Lake Haven retreat. His pulse quickened. This had to be it. It was too close to be a coincidence, too perfectly situated for a clandestine operation. Daniel grabbed his jacket and checked the time. Just past midnight. The town was asleep, but his mind was wide awake, buzzing with a dangerous energy. As he prepared to leave, He paused, reconsidering his approach. Should he try to contact the police again? Would they listen now that he had an address, a concrete lead? Probably not. They made it clear they considered the case closed, a personal matter between husband and wife. Besides, Alexander Vale was wealthy and influential, even after his fall from grace. If he had connections within the local police force, any warning might alert him, giving him time to move Celeste again. No, Daniel would have to do this himself. It was a risk, a foolish one perhaps, but he couldn't wait any longer. He would go to the address, see if there was any sign of Celeste, any indication that she was there, and then decide his next move. If he found evidence that she was being held against her will, undeniable proof, he could call for help, force the police to act. He picked up Celeste's phone one last time, the cold glass familiar in his hand, looking at her lock screen. A photo of them together on a hiking trip in the Lake District back in England. Her smile was radiant, genuine, full of life and happiness. That was the real Celeste, the woman he loved, not the hollow voice on the phone telling him their marriage was over. "I'm coming to find you," he whispered to the image, his voice raw with determination. "Hold on. Just hold on a little longer." With newfound resolve hardening his gaze, Daniel pocketed his own phone, made sure he had his wallet and the room key, and headed for the door. As he turned the handle, his gaze fell upon their wedding rings gleaming on the nightstand. Celeste's ring, left there while she went to yoga, planning to put it back on after her spa treatments, a symbol of their forever momentarily set aside. He picked up her ring, the cool metal a comfort in his palm, and slipped it into his pocket alongside his small utility knife, a pathetic weapon against whatever he might face, but better than nothing. Then, with a deep breath that did little to calm the storm inside him, he stepped out into the hallway, ready to find his wife, ready to fight for her, whether the police believed she needed rescuing or not. The night air was crisp and cold as Daniel exited the Lake Haven retreat, the silence of the late hour broken only by the distant sound of the lake lapping against the shore. He spotted a taxi idling outside the hotel entrance, the driver scrolling through his phone, a beacon of unexpected opportunity even at this late hour. Even now, life continued, oblivious to the turmoil in Daniel's world. Daniel approached the cab and climbed into the back seat, the worn upholstery a stark contrast to the luxury of the suite he'd just left. He pulled out his phone and showed the driver the address he'd found. "Can you take me here, please?" he asked, his voice a little hoarse. The driver glanced at the address, a remote location in the Fernhill area. "Sure thing, mate," he said, starting the engine. "Bit quiet out there this time of night, though. Not much happening." "That's fine," Daniel said, settling back in his seat, trying to appear casual, like any tourist heading back to their accommodation. He kept his GPS app open on his phone, tracking their movement through the darkened streets of Queenstown, every turn of the wheel taking him closer to an unknown confrontation. The town was subdued at this hour, the bustling tourist hub transformed into a quiet, almost deserted place. Small groups of late-night revelers still wandered between bars along the waterfront, their laughter carrying faintly on the breeze, a jarring contrast to Daniel's grim mission. As they left the town center behind, the streets grew darker and quieter, the houses more spaced apart, nestled amongst the trees and hills. Daniel's anxiety mounted with each passing minute, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. What would he find at Alexander's property? Would Celeste be there? And if she was, what was he realistically going to do about it? One man against Vale, and however many people he might have working for him, his security detail. The odds felt overwhelmingly stacked against him. After about 20 minutes, the taxi driver slowed down, pulling to the side of the road. "We're almost there, mate. Wanting to drop you a bit before the actual address? It's pretty dark out here, no streetlights." "Yes, please," Daniel agreed, grateful for the driver's discretion. A few houses down would be perfect. The driver pulled over at a spot where the road curved, about 100 yards from the address Daniel had given him. Daniel stepped out into the oppressive darkness, the only light coming from the distant stars and a sliver of moon. The taxi's tail lights receded down the road, leaving him alone in the cold night air, the silence of the countryside amplifying the pounding of his own heart. He waited a moment for his eyes to adjust to the darkness. The shapes of the surrounding trees and hills slowly becoming discernible before proceeding cautiously toward Vale's property, moving stealthily along the side of the road. As he drew closer, he could make out a large, modern house set back from the road, partially hidden by trees and a formidable-looking security gate. The house was completely dark, every window a black rectangle, no lights visible from within. There was no sign of activity around the perimeter, no cars in the driveway, nothing to suggest anyone was home. It looked utterly uninhabited, a dark, silent monolith. Daniel frowned, a wave of disappointment washing over him. Had his lead been a dead end? Had he come all this way for nothing? He stood in the deep shadows of a large pine tree, watching the property for several minutes, his senses on high alert, listening for any sound, any movement. But there was only the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant sound of crickets. He saw no movement, no indication that anyone was inside. Then, he remembered what Detective Wilson had said, that Celeste was supposedly staying at a service apartment. He scanned the area around him, his gaze sweeping across the darkened landscape, noticing for the first time a low-rise building about a block away from Vale's property, nestled closer to the lake. Even from this distance, he could see the sign illuminated by subtle ground lighting. Lakeview Service Apartments. Could that be where Celeste was? The detective had specifically said they'd checked on her at a service apartment. Hope, fragile but persistent, surged through him. This felt more plausible than Celeste willingly staying in Alexander Vale's isolated house. Daniel made his way toward the building, moving with renewed purpose, the cold no longer bothering him as much. As he reached the entrance, his suspicions were confirmed. It was definitely a service apartment complex, just as the police had described, modern and well-maintained. This had to be it. Celeste must be inside, ostensibly on her own, but Daniel was now more convinced than ever that she wasn't there willingly. But how would he get in? The main door required a key card, a security measure he hadn't anticipated. And even if he somehow managed to get inside, he had no idea which apartment Celeste might be in. There was a concierge desk visible through the glass doors, but it appeared unmanned at this late hour. He stood there, indecisive, weighing his options. He could wait outside until morning, hoping to catch a glimpse of Celeste if she left the building, a long shot in the darkness. Or he could return to Vale's property, see if there was any way to determine whether anyone was actually there, perhaps find another way in. Deciding on a latter course of action, feeling that the Vale lead was still the most promising, Daniel returned to the dark house. He approached the gate cautiously, keeping to the shadows, and pressed the intercom button. After a long moment of silence, he pressed it again, a little more insistently. Still nothing. He was about to turn away, feeling utterly defeated, when the speaker crackled to life, a sudden, startling sound in the quiet night. "Who is it?" a woman's voice asked, sounding elderly and clearly irritated at being disturbed at such an hour. "I'm looking for Alexander Vale," Daniel said, trying to keep his voice steady and confident, inventing a plausible reason for his presence. "Is he available? It's important." "Who's asking?" the woman demanded, her voice sharp. "I'm an associate from London," Daniel improvised, hoping a business connection would sound legitimate. "I need to speak with him urgently. It's about a pressing matter." There was a pause, a moment of silence that stretched into an eternity. Then, the woman replied, her tone dismissive. "The boss hasn't been here for a very long time. You got the wrong place. Go away. It's the middle of the night." "But it's very important," Daniel persisted, a sense of urgency overriding his caution. "When do you expect him back? Do you know where I can reach him?" "I said, go away," the woman snapped, her patience clearly at an end. "I'm not giving you any information. The boss doesn't live here anymore." There was a slight pause before she added, grudgingly, as if revealing a secret she shouldn't. "If you're that desperate to find him, try the Trout and tackle down the road. He used to conduct business there before all his trouble started. Spent a lot of time there." The intercom clicked off, leaving Daniel standing alone at the gate, the cryptic message hanging in the air. He felt a mixture of frustration and a renewed sense of hope, a new lead, however tenuous. If Vale had frequented this local bar, perhaps someone there might have information about his current whereabouts, a piece of the puzzle that could help Daniel find Celeste. Daniel returned to the road, his mind racing, processing the information. If Vale wasn't at his Queenstown property, where was he? And if Celeste was supposedly staying at the service apartments of her own free will, as the police claimed, why would she choose one so close to her ex-husband's property, a man she supposedly feared? It didn't make sense unless she was being kept there, a prisoner in plain sight. He looked back at the apartment building, considering his next move. It was late, and there was little more he could do tonight without raising suspicions. But he couldn't just go back to the hotel, not when he was so close, not when there was a chance Celeste was just a block away. Across the street from the apartments, Daniel noticed a small bar with a neon sign still glowing faintly in the window, a welcoming beacon in the darkness. The sign read, "The Trout and Tackle." It appeared to be one of the few establishments still open at this hour, a local haunt defying the quiet night. This had to be the place the housekeeper had mentioned. Perfect. He could go in, ask about Vale, see if anyone knew anything, and from there, he could keep an eye on the apartment building, see if there was any activity at Vale's property. At the very least, he might be able to gather some local intelligence, some insight into Vale's habits and connections. With a renewed sense of purpose, a determined glint in his eye, Daniel crossed the street and pushed open the door to the bar. The Trout and Tackle was a classic local watering hole, with dark wood paneling that seemed to absorb the light, fishing memorabilia adorning the walls, framed photos of impressive catches, old fishing nets, mounted fish, and the faint, lingering smell of beer and cigarette smoke that had seeped into the furnishings over decades. A few patrons were scattered around, a couple of older men nursing their drinks at the bar, a group of friends laughing loudly at a corner table, and a solitary woman reading a book, a glass of wine untouched before her. Daniel approached the bar and ordered a beer from the middle-aged bartender, a stocky man with a salt and pepper beard and kind eyes. "You're not from around here, mate," the bartender observed as he placed the beer in front of Daniel, his accent distinctly Kiwi. "No," Daniel replied, taking a small sip of the cold, refreshing liquid. "I'm from the States, just visiting." He hesitated for a moment, then decided to be direct. There was no time for subtlety. "Actually, I'm looking for information about Alexander Vale. I understand he used to come here." The bartender's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded, his friendly demeanor replaced by a wary caution. "Vale, yeah," he said slowly. "He used to be a regular before all that business trouble of his. Don't see him much these days." He studied Daniel's face, a silent question in his eyes. "You a business associate? Something like that?" "Something like that," Daniel said vaguely, not wanting to reveal too much, but needing to gain the bartender's trust. "Do you know if he's currently in Queenstown?" The bartender shrugged, wiping down the counter with a damp cloth. "Couldn't say for sure. He comes and goes. But if you're really looking to find Vale or learn about his movements around here, you should talk to Darren Hutchins. He runs the charter business Vale uses whenever he's in town. Vale doesn't own boats himself. Too traceable, I reckon. But he's chartered from Darren for years." Daniel's heart quickened. This was exactly the kind of information he needed, a tangible link to Vale's activities. "Is this Darren a regular here?" "Oh yeah," the bartender nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "He'll probably be in tonight. Man has a tradition. Been doing it for 15 years, every Friday and Saturday night, same time." He glanced at his watch. "Should be here any time now." Actually, like clockwork, Daniel positioned himself at a small table by the window, strategically chosen so he had a clear view of both the service apartments across the street and the road leading to Vale's property in the distance. From here, he could also keep an eye on the bar's entrance, watching for the arrival of Darren Hutchins. The beer arrived, and Daniel took a small sip, needing to keep his wits about him, to stay focused. The cool liquid did little to calm his racing thoughts, the anxieties swirling in his mind like a relentless storm. He felt simultaneously so close to and so far from finding Celeste. He checked his watch again. Nearly 1 a.m. How long should he wait here? What was his actual plan once he found this Darren Hutchins? He didn't have a weapon, just a small knife. He was acting on instinct, driven by a desperate love and a chilling certainty that Celeste was in danger. As he contemplated his next move, the door to the bar swung open, and a boisterous man in his 40s entered, radiating an air of self-importance, followed by three equally lively friends. The man was tall, with a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors and the confident, almost arrogant demeanor of someone who knew he owned the room, or at least thought he did. "First round's on me, lads," he announced loudly to his friends, slapping one on the back as they made their way to a table not far from where Daniel sat. "Order whatever you want, food, drinks, the works. Tonight, we celebrate." Daniel tried not to eavesdrop, focusing instead on the view outside the window, on the darkened apartment building and the distant, silent house on the hill. But the man's voice carried across the half-empty bar, loud and unfiltered. "I just made a bloody fortune tonight," the man declared, pulling out his phone with a flourish and flashing the screen at his friends. "Look at this. A man just rented my yacht, the Southern Cross, half an hour ago. Paid double the going rate without even haggling. Just wired the money." His friends leaned in to look at the screen, murmuring in surprise and admiration. "You sure it's not a scam, Darren?" one asked, a note of skepticism in his voice. "Looks like it came from an offshore account." "Nah, it's legit," Darren insisted, his chest puffed out with pride. "Already checked my bank account. $200,000 right there, in black and white. 200 grand for a week's charter." Another friend whistled, impressed. "Must be some big shot. Who is it?" "That's not all," Darren continued, swiping on his phone, his grin widening. "He also paid the security deposit in crypto. Look at the wallet address. Initial AV. AV, one of the friends mused aloud, scratching his chin. "Could that be Alexander Vale? That rich bloke who lives up a block up the hill? The one with all the recent trouble?" Daniel's ears perked up at the mention of Vale's name, his blood running cold and hot at the same time. He subtly shifted his position to better hear the conversation, his heart pounding in his chest like a drum. Could this be it? The connection he was looking for? "Could be," Darren nodded thoughtfully, stroking his beard. "Had a chat with him in this very bar a few years back. Exchanged numbers, actually. Said he might want to charter the yacht sometime if he was in town. Guess he finally decided to take me up on it." He shrugged, taking a long swig of his beer. "Whoever it is, I don't much care, as long as the money's good and they don't trash the boat." Daniel couldn't believe his luck. This was it. A solid lead, a concrete piece of information. If Vale had just chartered a yacht, a luxury cruiser like the Southern Cross, that could be how he planned to disappear with Celeste. Away from the mainland, out of cell reception range, they'd be nearly impossible to track, lost somewhere in the vast, remote fjords of New Zealand. He stood up from his table, abandoning his barely touched beer, and approached the group's table, his heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and apprehension. "Excuse me," he said, trying to sound casual, despite the tremor in his voice. "I couldn't help overhearing. You must be Darren Hutchins." The men looked up at him with varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity, their laughter and revelry ceasing as they assessed the newcomer. "And who might you be?" Darren asked, eyeing him up and down, his expression wary. Daniel hesitated for a moment, then decided on a version of the truth, the most important part of it, at least. "My name's Daniel Miller. I think Mr. Vale has taken my wife." The group exchanged glances, and one of them, a burly man with a red face, snickered, clearly thinking this was some kind of domestic dispute. "Mate, sounds like you've got woman troubles," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. "If she's left you for a rich bloke, can't say I blame her." Daniel felt his face flush with a surge of anger, but he kept his composure, focusing on Darren. "It's not like that," he said, his voice low and intense. "He's her ex-husband. He's obsessed with her. She didn't leave me willingly." Darren studied him for a moment, the smile fading from his face as he saw the genuine distress in Daniel's eyes. "You do look like a man whose missus has gone missing," he observed, his tone softening slightly. "All right, mate. Sit down. Let me hear your story. What's going on?" Daniel sat, quickly giving them a condensed version of events. Meeting Celeste, her history with Vale, and his threats, their wedding, and her sudden disappearance during their honeymoon. He left out the details about Vale's criminal activities, focusing instead on the man's obsessive behavior and the chilling phone call he'd received. "I believe he's planning to take her away on this yacht you've chartered to him," Daniel concluded, leaning forward, his voice urgent. "He's going to disappear with her. Make sure no one can find her. I need to know where they're going. I need to get to her before he sails." Darren looked skeptical, scratching his chin thoughtfully. "Look, mate, I feel for you, I really do. It's a rotten situation, but I've got a business to run. Can't go around giving out client information just like that, based on some story, however convincing it sounds. Please," Daniel implored, his voice strained. "At least tell me if they've left yet. Where's the yacht docked? Is it nearby?" Darren sighed, then seemed to soften, perhaps swayed by the raw desperation in Daniel's plea or the large sum of money he'd just received. "All right, tell you what," he said, his decision made. "I'm in a good mood tonight, with this unexpected payday. Let me check with my staff at the dock." He pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking in low tones, asking about the Southern Cross and the party expected aboard. He listened for a moment, his expression neutral, then hung up and looked at Daniel. "They haven't left yet," he said. "The yacht's still in my private anchorage in Fiordland. Staff says they're expecting the party to arrive within the hour." Daniel's heart raced, a surge of adrenaline coursing through him. Fiordland. It was remote, isolated, exactly the kind of place Vale would choose to disappear. Fiordland? How far is that from here? "About 3 hours' drive from here," Darren replied. "2 if you really push it, this time of night with no traffic. It's a long haul." Daniel stood up, the table scraping against the floor, oblivious to everything but the urgency of the situation. "I need to get there now. Is there any way you could take me? I'll pay you whatever it costs. I'll pay you double, triple what Vale's paying. I have access to funds." Darren laughed, a booming sound that filled the sudden silence in the bar. "You don't look like you've got that kind of cash on you, son." He paused, then his expression turned serious. "But I tell you what, this is quite a story. I'm curious to see how this plays out. And if this Vale character really has taken your wife against her will, well, I don't want that on my conscience, knowing I could have helped." He stood up, his decision made. "I'll drive you there myself. But you have to promise me one thing." "Anything," Daniel said eagerly, his hopes soaring. "Don't piss off the rich guy too much," Darren said, a mischievous glint in his eye. "I don't want him coming after me asking for his money back." He winked at his friends, who were now watching with rapt attention, their earlier snickers forgotten. "Always knew I'd get a good story out of that yacht someday. Life on this southernmost island can get pretty dull sometimes." One of his friends raised his glass in a silent toast to Darren's unexpected night of adventure. As the group toasted, Daniel felt a surge of genuine hope for the first time since Celeste had disappeared. He was on Vale's trail, a real lead, and with luck, just maybe, he'd reach the yacht before it sailed, before Vale could take Celeste beyond his reach forever. "Let's go," Darren said, downing the last of his drink in one gulp. "Got my Range Rover outside. We'll make it in 2 hours flat if the roads are clear." True to his word, Darren's driving got them to Fiordland in just under 2 hours. The journey had been a blur of winding mountain roads, dark forests, and tense silence in the car, broken only occasionally by Darren's casual commentary on the rugged landscape or probing questions about Daniel's situation. Daniel had shared a little more, enough to convey the seriousness of the situation and the depth of his conviction that Celeste was in danger. As they approached the private anchorage, nestled in a secluded inlet surrounded by the towering peaks and dense forests of Fiordland National Park, a place of breathtaking, imposing natural beauty, Daniel's anxiety reached a fever pitch. The remote location confirmed his suspicions. Vale had chosen this spot precisely because it was isolated, far from prying eyes, a perfect place to disappear without a trace. "There's my beauty," Darren said, his voice full of pride, as they rounded the final bend, his high-beam headlights illuminating a sleek white yacht moored at a private dock, a luxury vessel gleaming in the darkness. The Southern Cross. 76 feet of pure luxury. Man's paying top dollar for her. Daniel peered through the windshield, his heart pounding against his ribs like a frantic drum. The yacht's lights were on, casting a golden glow on the dark water, a beacon of activity in the wilderness. Several figures moved across the deck, preparing for departure. And there, standing at the end of the dock, a small group of people gathered. "Pull over here," Daniel urged, his voice tight with urgency. "I don't want them to see us coming. We need to approach carefully." Darren obliged, pulling the large Range Rover behind a small maintenance building, about 100 yards from the dock, a natural blind spot. From this vantage point, they had a clear view of the yacht and the people gathered at the dock, a scene illuminated by the yacht's lights. "Got some binoculars in the glove box," Darren offered, reaching across the front seat. "Use those. Might give you a better look." Daniel retrieved the binoculars and trained them on the dock, his hands surprisingly steady despite the tremor running through him. His breath caught in his throat as he spotted her. Celeste. She was walking down the wooden planks toward the yacht, a small figure against the vastness of the night and the imposing vessel. She was alive. She was here. But something wasn't right. Though she wasn't bound or visibly restrained, her body language was tense, her movements stiff and unnatural. She wasn't walking willingly. She was being guided, almost propelled. Behind her walked two men in dark suits, their posture rigid, their eyes scanning the surroundings, security, by the look of them, professional and watchful. And there, stepping out of the yacht to greet her, was Alexander Vale himself, a smug, triumphant look on his face. Daniel watched, his jaw clenching, as Vale reached out to touch Celeste's arm, a possessive gesture. She flinched, pulling away from him, a clear sign of her reluctance. But he persisted, placing his hand on the small of her back to guide her onto the yacht, a hand that looked heavy and controlling. "That's them," Daniel said, his voice tight with anger, pointing towards the dock. "That's my wife, Celeste. And that's Vale, the man in the blue suit stepping out of the yacht. He's got her. Doesn't look like she's going willingly," Darren observed, squinting at the scene through the windshield, his earlier skepticism replaced by a grim understanding. "No, she's not," Daniel confirmed, his resolve hardening, all doubt erased. This wasn't a wife who had voluntarily left her husband. This was a woman being taken against her will. "I need to call the police. Now." He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving swiftly as he dialed Detective Wilson's number, praying he would answer despite the late hour. To his surprise, the detective answered on the second ring, his voice groggy but alert. "Mr. Miller? It's 3 a.m. "What is it?" "I found her," Daniel interrupted, his voice urgent, spilling out the words in a rush. "Celeste. She's at a private dock in Fjordland. Alexander Vale has her, and he's about to take her away on a yacht. You have to hurry." There was a pause, a moment of silence on the other end, as Detective Wilson processed the startling information. Then his voice came back, sharper now, fully awake and focused. "Mr. Miller, where exactly are you? Can you give me precise coordinates?" Daniel relayed their location, describing the private anchorage and the sleek white yacht, providing as much detail as he could. "How did you find this place?" the detective asked, a note of surprise in his voice. "I did some research on Vale, found his property in Queenstown," Daniel explained quickly. "Then I got a lead on the owner of the yacht Vale chartered. He drove me here. Detective, you need to understand, they're about to leave. He's taking her. Mr. Miller, this is an extremely dangerous situation," Detective Wilson said, his tone serious. "You need to stay where you are. Do not approach Vale or his men. They may be armed and dangerous. We'll deploy a search and rescue team immediately, air and sea units. You need to hurry," Daniel urged, his gaze fixed on the dock. "They're boarding the yacht now. If they leave, if they get out into the fjords, you might never find her. Celeste doesn't look comfortable at all. She looks terrified." "Understood," the detective said. "Police and maritime units are on their way, but it will take time to reach your location. Stay hidden, Mr. Miller. Do you understand? Your safety is paramount." "Yes," Daniel said, though his mind was already racing ahead to what he'd do if the police didn't arrive in time. He couldn't just sit there and watch. After ending the call, he turned to Darren, who had been listening intently. "Police are on their way, but I don't know if they'll get here before the yacht leaves. Once they're out there, it's a maze of inlets and islands. Do you know where they might be heading?" Darren scratched his chin thoughtfully, his eyes scanning the dark horizon. "There's just so many islands out there, separated from the mainland by Tamatea/Dusky Sound and Te Poitaha/Breaksea Sound. Once they're out there, there's no signal, no coverage. Those are remote islands, barely inhabited. If they reach one of those, you might not find her for days, maybe weeks. It's like disappearing off the face of the earth. Daniel watched through the binoculars as Vale's security team began removing the mooring lines, preparing the yacht for departure. They were preparing to depart. He was running out of time. "I can't wait," Daniel decided, his voice firm, his gaze unwavering. "If the yacht leaves, we might never find Celeste. I have to do something." Darren grabbed his arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "What are you thinking of doing, mate? Those blokes look like professionals. You'll get yourself killed. It's not worth it." "I have to try," Daniel insisted, pulling away from his grip. "I can't just sit here and watch them take her away. I promised I'd find her." Darren sighed heavily, a mixture of resignation and grudging admiration on his face. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. Foolish maybe, but guts." He reached into the back seat of the Range Rover and pulled out a small case. Opening it, he removed what looked like a handgun, a solid, weighty object in his hand. "Here," he said, holding it out to Daniel. "It's not real, just a replica. Illegal to have real guns here, and bloody hard to find anyway. But they won't know that in the dark. Might give you a fighting chance, or at least make them hesitate." Daniel took the mock gun, testing its weight in his hand, the cold metal feeling strangely empowering. It wasn't real, but it looked real enough. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. "Don't mention my name," Darren warned, his tone serious now. "I don't want that man chasing after me if this goes sideways. And be careful. Replica or not, those security blokes shoot first and ask questions later. They're paid to be ruthless." Daniel nodded, understanding the risk. Taking a deep breath, he opened the car door and stepped out into the cold night air, the silence broken only by the distant hum of the yacht's engines. He tucked the mock gun into his waistband, covering it with his jacket, and began making his way toward the dock, staying in the shadows of the trees, moving as silently as possible. The yacht's engines had started, a low hum carrying across the water, a signal that their departure was imminent. He was running out of time. When he reached the end of the dock, the wooden planks cold and damp under his feet, Daniel pulled out the gun and stepped out of the shadows into the soft glow of the yacht's lights. The security team was too focused on their departure preparations, on casting off the mooring lines, to notice him until he was halfway down the dock. "Stop," he called out, his voice ringing across the water, raw with emotion and adrenaline, pointing the gun, the replica feeling surprisingly real in his hand, at Vale. "Step away from my wife." All heads turned toward him, startled by his sudden appearance. The security team's hands instinctively went to their weapons, their faces grim and determined. Vale's eyes widened in surprise for a fleeting second, then narrowed with contempt and recognition. Celeste's reaction was the most telling. Her face transformed with relief and a surge of desperate hope when she saw him. "Ethan!" she cried out, taking a step toward him, her voice a lifeline in the darkness, before one of Vale's men grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Let her go," Daniel commanded, keeping the mock gun trained on Vale, his hand steady despite the tremor in his body. "It's over, Alexander. The police are on their way. You're caught." Vale recovered from his surprise, a slow, arrogant smirk forming on his face. "Daniel Miller," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Always the hero, aren't you? Always trying to save the day." He gestured dismissively with a flick of his wrist. "But you're too late. We're leaving, and Celeste is coming with me. She belongs with me." "No, I'm not," Celeste said firmly, struggling against the man holding her arm, her voice strong despite her fear. "Let me go. I told you, Alexander. I will never be with you again." Vale ignored her, his eyes locked on Daniel, a cold fury in their depths. "You should have stayed in your hotel room, Miller, mourning your failed marriage. Now you've complicated things unnecessarily. You've made a foolish mistake." "We kept our end of the bargain, Vale," Daniel said, taking another step forward, closing the distance between them. "We stayed quiet about your dirty business, about what Celeste knew. Why did you do this to us? Why couldn't you just leave us alone?" Vale's face hardened, the smirk vanishing, replaced by a look of pure malice. "You think I don't know it wasn't you who reported me?" he sneered. "One of my oldest partners stabbed me in the back. I lost properties, a significant portion of my wealth, my standing." He glanced at Celeste, a possessive gleam in his eye. "But I'm still wealthy enough. And after I lost everything that mattered, everything I'd built, I realized what I missed most was her. My perfect Celeste." He reached out to touch Celeste's face, but she recoiled violently, jerking away from him, a clear act of defiance. "When I heard about your wedding," Vale continued, his voice low and dangerous, "I had to see it for myself. I have contacts everywhere, Daniel. And when I saw you two there, so happy together, I couldn't let that stand. She belongs with me." "She belongs wherever she chooses to be," Daniel replied, his voice firm, "and she's chosen to leave you. Let her go, Vale. It's over. You're not going to win this time." The distant, but rapidly approaching, sound of helicopter rotors suddenly filled the air, growing louder by the second. Vale and his men looked up, momentarily distracted, their eyes scanning the dark sky. In that instant, everything changed. Vale's security team, panicking at the unmistakable sound of approaching authorities, a sound that meant their plan had failed, that their escape was compromised, made a split-second decision. Two of them broke away from the group, abandoning their posts, and dove into the dark, cold water to escape, hoping to swim ashore and disappear into the wilderness. The others hesitated, looking to Vale for direction, their earlier ruthlessness replaced by uncertainty. Seizing the moment, Celeste wrenched free from her captor's grip, her eyes wide with opportunity, and ran to Daniel, who kept the gun pointed at Vale with one hand, while wrapping his other arm protectively around her, pulling her close, a shield against the danger. "It's really over now, Vale," Daniel said as the helicopter's powerful searchlight swept across the water, illuminating the dock in a harsh, blinding white light, cutting through the darkness and exposing their clandestine operation. The helicopter's searchlight bathed the dock in an almost daylight-bright glow, the thunderous beating of its rotors drowning out all other sounds, a powerful symbol of the authorities' arrival. In the harsh, unforgiving light, Daniel could see the panic spreading across Vale's face, his carefully constructed plan crumbling around him. Two police boats approached rapidly from the south end of the inlet, their blue lights flashing across the dark water, sirens wailing faintly in the distance. On the shore, several police vehicles pulled up, their headlights cutting through the night, officers emerging from the cars. Vale's remaining security personnel looked to him for guidance, but the fight had gone out of him. The arrival of the police, the sound of the helicopter, it was overwhelming, undeniable. As the police boats pulled alongside the dock, officers with weapons drawn shouted commands, their voices amplified by megaphones. "Down on the ground. Everyone down on the ground now." Vale's men complied immediately, dropping to their knees and then lying prone on the wooden planks of the dock, their hands laced behind their heads. Only Vale himself remained standing for a moment, a look of cold fury and bitter defeat on his face as he stared at Daniel and Celeste, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. "This isn't over," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the sound of the helicopter, just before two officers approached him from behind, their movements swift and professional. "Alexander Vale, you're under arrest," one of them announced, holstering his weapon and pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As Vale was being handcuffed, the cold metal clicking into place, and led away by the officers, his head held high despite the circumstances, Daniel finally lowered the mock gun, his arm trembling from the sustained tension, the adrenaline draining away, leaving him feeling weak and shaky. Celeste turned fully into his embrace, burying her face against his chest, silent sobs shaking her body as the reality of what had just happened, of the danger she had been in, finally hit her. "It's okay," he murmured into her hair, holding her tightly, stroking her back. "It's over now. You're safe. I've got you." A female officer approached them, her demeanor calm and professional. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller, I'm Sergeant Capper. We need to get you both to safety and take your statements. You've been through quite an ordeal." Daniel nodded, guiding Celeste toward the waiting police vehicle on the shore. As they walked, he discreetly handed the mock gun to Sergeant Capper, whispering, "It's not real. Just a replica." The officer took it with a raised eyebrow, a hint of surprise on her face, but said nothing, merely nodding her understanding. Once inside the warmth of the police car, the heating a welcome contrast to the cold night air, Celeste finally looked up at Daniel, her eyes red-rimmed but clear, filled with a mixture of gratitude and wonder. "How did you find me?" she whispered, her voice still shaky. "How did you know?" "I saw him," Daniel explained softly, holding her hand tightly. "I saw Alexander in our wedding photos. He was there in the background, watching us. Then I remembered all the threats, his obsession with you. When you disappeared and nothing added up, I knew it had to be him. It was the only thing that made sense." Celeste squeezed his hand, her grip firm. "He had someone watching us from the moment we arrived in New Zealand," she said, the realization chilling her to the bone. "When that man approached me at the resort, the one in the staff uniform, I thought he was hotel staff. But he showed me a photo of my parents. Said they would be harmed if I didn't go with him quietly, if I made a fuss. He knew about my family, Daniel. He knew my weak spot." Daniel's blood ran cold. "Did he hurt you? Did he?" She shook her head, her gaze meeting his, reassuring him. "No, he wanted me to choose him willingly, or at least to make it look like I did. He kept saying we were meant to be together, that you and I would never work out, that I belonged with him. He made me call you. Stood right there with his men, telling me what to say, what to tell you. I tried to sound as unconvincing as possible, Daniel, hoping you'd realize something was wrong, that it wasn't really me." "I did," Daniel assured her, his voice thick with emotion. "Nothing about that call sounded like you, Celeste. Not the woman I know. And you left your phone behind. I knew you'd never do that voluntarily, not with your family and friends so far away." The drive to the nearest police station seemed a blur of dark forests and winding roads, the initial shock of the rescue slowly wearing off, leaving both Daniel and Celeste exhausted but profoundly grateful to be together and safe. At the station, they were separated for individual interviews, providing their statements to different officers. Daniel was taken to a small, sterile room where he met with a different detective than the one he dealt with in Queenstown, a Detective Sergeant Morris. "I'm Detective Sergeant Morris." The officer introduced himself, a kind, no-nonsense man. "I understand you've had quite a night, Mr. Miller." A truly remarkable turn of events. Daniel nodded wearily, leaning back in the uncomfortable chair. "You could say that. It feels like a lifetime has passed since yesterday morning." He gave his statement, recounting everything from Celeste's disappearance to his discovery of Vale in their wedding photos, his research into Vale's properties, the lead on Darren Hutchins, and finally, the tense confrontation at the dock. He described the mock gun, the fear he felt, and the overwhelming relief when the helicopter arrived. The detective recorded everything diligently, occasionally asking for clarification, but for the most part, letting Daniel tell his story uninterrupted, a narrative of a husband's desperate search for his missing wife. "We'll need to coordinate with the Queenstown police, of course," Detective Morris explained when Daniel had finished, closing his notebook. "Detective Wilson has already been briefed on the situation and the events of tonight. He's relieved to hear Mrs. Miller is safe." "Will Vale be able to get away with this?" Daniel asked, the worry still lingering. "He's wealthy, has connections, expensive lawyers." "Not this time, Mr. Miller," Morris assured him, his tone firm and confident. "Kidnapping is a very serious offense, even if you try to make it look otherwise. And with the evidence we have, including Mrs. Miller's testimony, the footage of the fake staff member who initially approached her, the tracking device we found, we have a very strong case. Additionally, Mr. Vale is a U.S. citizen with extensive business interests and possible money laundering operations in New Zealand that will be investigated. There will be multiple agencies involved in his prosecution. He's facing significant charges." The door opened quietly, and another officer entered, carrying a small evidence bag. "Sergeant, we found this during the security check of Mrs. Miller," the officer reported, handing the bag to Detective Morris. Inside the bag, nestled amongst a few other small personal items, lay a delicate beaded bracelet, intricately woven. Daniel recognized it instantly. Celeste had worn it for months, almost constantly, cherishing it as a gift she believed came from her mother. Our team found a tracking device embedded in one of the beads, the officer explained, his voice low. Very sophisticated, virtually undetectable without specialized equipment. He's been monitoring her movements for months. Daniel stared at the bracelet in shock, a cold realization washing over him. She'd been wearing that since about 4 months before their wedding, a gift that was supposedly a symbol of love and connection, but was in reality a tool of control and surveillance. Detective Morris nodded grimly. It appears Mr. Vale has been monitoring your wife's movement for some time, Mr. Miller, planning this operation carefully, waiting for the right opportunity. A chilling thought struck Daniel. The honeymoon to Queenstown, which Celeste had said was a generous wedding gift from her old boss, a woman she'd been close to, suddenly seemed far less innocent. Could Vale have orchestrated that too, subtly manipulating events to get them to a foreign country where he owned property, where he had deep-rooted connections, and where they would be cut off from their usual support network? It all seemed too perfectly arranged, too coincidental to be anything but a deliberate plan. After completing his statement, the emotional and physical toll of the night catching up to him, Daniel was led to a waiting area where Celeste was already seated, wrapped in a warm blanket provided by the station staff, a cup of tea in her hands. The moment she saw him, her eyes lit up, and she stood and rushed into his arms, clinging to him, burying her face against his chest. Over her shoulder, Daniel watched as Vale was led through the station toward the detention cells, his hands cuffed behind his back. Despite his handcuffs and the officers flanking him, Vale maintained his arrogant demeanor, a smug, unsettling grin spreading across his face when he spotted Daniel and Celeste, a look that promised future trouble. "This isn't done, Miller," he called out, his voice echoing down the hallway. "You can't run from me. You can't hide." Daniel met his gaze steadily, holding Celeste closer. "Yes, we can, Vale," he replied, his voice calm and clear. "Especially when you have no money left to chase us with." The legal battles, the investigations into his finances and criminal activities, they would strip him of his power. Vale's grin faltered slightly, a flicker of anger and frustration crossing his face, before the officers ushered him away, disappearing around a corner. Turning his attention back to Celeste, Daniel guided her gently to the seats, keeping his arm around her. "Are you okay? Really okay?" She nodded, exhaustion evident in her eyes, but a newfound strength seemed to radiate from her. "I am now," she whispered, leaning her head on his shoulder. She hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Did they tell you about the bracelet?" "Yes," Daniel replied softly, his voice filled with empathy. "He's been tracking you for months, since before the wedding." Celeste shuddered, a visible tremor running through her body. "I never suspected. It was from my mother, or so I thought. It arrived in the mail with a card signed from her. I wore it every day." She looked down at her bare wrist, where the bracelet had been. "I feel violated, Daniel. No, he's been watching me, following me, all this time. It's a horrible feeling." Daniel held her close, stroking her hair. "It's over now, Celeste. He won't be able to hurt you anymore. He'll be locked away for a long time." "I'd like to hope so," Celeste murmured, her voice muffled as she buried her face in his neck, clinging to him like a lifeline. A female officer approached them with 2 cups of coffee, the steam rising in the cool air of the station. "You two have had quite an ordeal," she said kindly. "The detectives say you're free to go once transport back to Queenstown can be arranged. Should be in about an hour." As the officer walked away, leaving them alone once more, Celeste turned to Daniel with a tentative smile, a spark of her usual spirit returning. "Are we still on our honeymoon?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "We still have 3 days left, you know, and we haven't even gone flight boarding or cliff jumping yet." Daniel laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy, feeling the tension of the past days finally begin to dissolve, replaced by a profound sense of gratitude and love. I think I might pass on those for now, he said, squeezing her hand. Losing you gave me enough of a heart attack to last a lifetime, and I imagine the police proceedings will keep us busy for most of those 3 days anyway. Celeste laid her head back on his shoulder, her hand finding his, their fingers intertwining. Surely we can find some time in between to do something fun, she murmured. We're at the other end of the world, Daniel, probably closest to the South Pole we'll ever be. We shouldn't waste it, even a single day. Before we make any plans, Daniel said suddenly, his voice serious again, needing this one last reassurance. I need to be sure, Celeste. All those things you said on the phone, about regretting our marriage, about us having different interests. He swallowed hard, his gaze searching hers. No, that was real, right? It was just him. Celeste lifted her head to look him directly in the eyes, her gaze steady and unwavering, full of love and certainty. Not a single word, Daniel, she promised, her voice clear and strong. Not one word of it was true. I've never been more certain of anything in my life than I am of us. Vale made me say those things, hoping to convince you, hoping to make you give up searching for me. Her expression softened, a gentle smile gracing her lips. But I knew you wouldn't believe it. I knew you'd find me. I always knew you would. Daniel pulled her close again, holding her tightly, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude, his heart overflowing with love for this strong, resilient woman. In the span of a few days, they had weathered a storm that would have broken many couples, a trial by fire that had tested the very foundations of their relationship. They had faced down a dangerous, obsessive adversary and emerged, not unscathed, but stronger, their bond forged in the crucible of fear and desperation. As dawn began to break over the majestic mountains of Fjordland, casting its golden light through the station windows, a new day dawning, Daniel and Celeste sat together, planning not just the remainder of their honeymoon, but the life they would build together, a life finally free from the dark shadow of Alexander Vale. In the quiet of the early morning, with Celeste's hand warm and firm in his, Daniel suddenly remembered something. He reached into his pocket and pulled out her wedding ring, the one she'd left on the nightstand before heading to yoga that fateful morning, a symbol of their commitment that had felt so vulnerable in her absence. I think this belongs to you, he said softly, holding the simple gold band between his fingers, the metal catching the first rays of sunlight. Celeste's eyes widened, filled with emotion as she looked at the ring, then at him. You brought it with you? I couldn't leave it behind, Daniel said, his voice husky with emotion. Just like I couldn't leave you behind. He took her left hand gently in his and slid the ring back on her finger where it belonged, a perfect fit. The simple gold band caught the morning light, gleaming as if brand new, a symbol of their enduring love and their future together. Celeste stared at it for a moment, a tear tracing a path down her cheek, then intertwined her fingers with his, holding his hand tightly. Perfect fit, she whispered, her voice full of love. Just like us. I love you, he whispered into her hair, burying his face in its softness. I love you too, she replied, squeezing his hand, a promise in her touch. Always. Outside, the sun continued its ascent, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, a breathtaking display of nature's beauty. A new day, a fresh start, and the promise of countless more days together, stretching out before them like the vast, beautiful landscape of New Zealand itself. Thank you for reading. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the channel for more thrilling tales.